why do it like this when more conventional approaches, you know, would have been available to you perhaps? You know, why? Because Feltham Sings is, I believe, the first documentary musical, and Sarajevo Shelved Memories is the first documentary. Why go for these avenues rather than something that people might recognise more instantly, perhaps?
Would you like to go first?
I can do that. Well, essentially, for me, it was a question of also investigating the idea of authenticity within docudrama, because this is one of the major debates. If you read up on docudrama, that this is the major debate that sort of tracks the whole history of docudrama, as what makes it authentic and how can you interpret a real event through narrative structures. So for me it became a question of form, and it's something that I really wanted to investigate, is what would make something authentic and how could you sort of pacify that whole debate about authenticity, because I think it ultimately is quite destructive for the actual subject matter. So in very basic terms, that was my reasoning for trying to experiment with form.
I think for me there's a few things really. One is that when I made Feltham Sings, a year or two before I'd made a film called Drinking for England, which explored the English relationship to alcohol. And I worked with a poet called Simon Armitage, and we'd done a film before that called Saturday Night. And in Drinking for England, we took people, I interviewed people from a real cross-section of people from across England, in terms of age and class. And we talked to them about drinking and about their drinking and what it meant to them. And then we gave this material to Simon Armitage, and he turned their words into verses, into poems for them to recite. And the film is a mixture of kind of observational stuff, more, you know, very traditional observational documentary, but then occasionally these people talking about what they do and about drink in verse. And in the course of making this is accidents happen in films quite often, and they determine the course of a film. And the accident that happened here was that one of my characters, I wanted one character who was decided they had to stop drinking. And we found this woman called Jane, and she was in rehab, and we were filming her in rehab. And she said, "Oh, you know, once I get sober, I'll be able to rejoin the choir that I was a part of." And I said, "Oh, you can sing?" And she said, "Yeah." So then I just had this idea that why don't we get her verse turned into song? And then one of the other characters said that they could sing. So we had 2 songs in that film, and they were really surprising when they appeared in the film. You know, you hadn't really expected it to be a song. And then when Simon and I talked about Feltham Sings, we like to do something different with each film. We don't. There are some people who keep returning to the same themes and the same methods, and it's kind of, you know, what their career is. But we like to try something very different. So we said, well, why don't we do a full musical where everybody in the film sings? And I mean, that's the kind of the genesis of it. But in terms of why, for me, well, we could take up the rest of the afternoon with this, but partly it's to do with the fact that when I look at most documentary, I find that most documentary makers aren't very bold or exciting or innovative with what they do, and I think there's somehow a kind of feeling that it's not really documentary, it's not authentic unless it's observational, which is just nonsense, I think.
When we do some close analysis in this department, which has a great history of doing close analysis and really looking at every frame and every decision made, we begin most of those sessions by looking at the opening of shots. And I just wondered, how does the opening moments, when in your pre-production or production process do you decide on what's going to be opening and how the opening is going to work? When and how does that feature in your decision-making progress when you make a film?
For me, it's quite a long way into the process. I mean, I think that one of the joys and sometimes the pains of making a documentary is that the film you set out to make isn't always the film you end up making, and sometimes the film reveals itself to you in the course of making it. And when I went to Feltham, I didn't know that in the grounds of the prison there were lots of these peacocks running around, and I didn't think much of it when we got there, but I'd filmed some of them. And then the more time I spent in the prison, the more I realised that these peacocks were rather like the young men in the prison. They strut around and they're very cocky, and you know, there was that expression, proud as a peacock. And I thought that the young men strutted around quite a lot as well, and I thought that was quite interesting about them. So that shot of the peacock was to kind of set that idea up, really, that we were watching people who like to display and like to act out, and that was one of the the things about also doing a musical in that prison, was because these boys weren't shy about acting and about putting themselves forward and about performing. You know, they were very keen to do that. So that kind of, you know, that comes very late in the process, really. I mean, well into the editing. It's sometimes, I mean, the editor that I work with just kind of likes to say that we just get all the material and chuck it up in the air and then we see what happens, and we don't necessarily always have a plan, or hardly ever, actually.
I do have two questions. I'll explain. The first question that my documentary specialists were interested in was, perhaps quite obviously, why have the special effects? Why have it here, and why have it also only the once? Because I think it only happens the once in the film. So what made you decide to go and use that kind of technique in there?
Well, it comes straight after a very documentary-like sequence. I mean, we don't know that these two people in the film are actually the characters that are going to be in the in the narrative sections, and we also have pure documentary images. So what the audience is expecting is quite a conventional approach to observational documentary and interview scenarios. So I think it's like 5 or 6 minutes. The initial 5 or 6 minutes.
Yes, it is 6 minutes and 4 seconds. I timed it.
Brilliant. The audience don't know there's going to be a narrative dimension to this, and then I use also a conventional strategy, the idea of a reconstructed image that's used in many documentary filmmaking. But this image is completely blown up, and out of that destruction of the completely artificial image comes a different kind of image that I'm trying to introduce by making this film, is an image that merges different formats. You've got the theatrical setting, quite an obviously recreated artificial space, interspersed with documentary footage, either inside the theatrical space or edited into the sequence. So it becomes a medium that makes the construction and the artificiality of the film quite obvious, whereas the beginning of the film does not do that. So the idea behind that was to allow the audience to confront this idea of construction head on, and sort of accept the images that I create without any suspicion of deceit. Really, I'm telling the audience what you're looking at is a perspective, in my perspective, whereas in some documentary films, I feel that their hand in constructing the narrative is not made obvious, and as the opening sequence shows, that there are some quite ethically dubious things that go on behind the camera in the process of making the decisions of what camera angles to choose. So that's why I inserted that completely artificial image.
And exploded
it. Yeah. So it's a kind of a self-conscious approach to to the film.
Yes, because you're exploding the domestic interior that, of course, the siege, the war itself has exploded before.
Yeah, and the most private space, that's Vladan's bedroom,
Is it something, you know, do you get subject matter material, do you sort of happen to chance upon it, or does it, how does it come to you, or do you come to it more?
It just depends. I mean, I suppose I have certain, not obsessions, but I have, you know, some quite strong interests, but I don't know. It's more to do with just trying to think actually what I'm doing next. I'm doing a film about infant mortality. I suppose I went through a period of I wanted to make films about contemporary society and the place of women in contemporary society, and I thought it was quite important for a man to be making those films, and I made films about domestic violence and rape and murder. So not much comedic stuff there, but you know, I just thought it was.
It's light-hearted, gag.
You know, I suppose your interests change. I mean, it depends what you happen to be interested in at any one time. A couple of years ago, I made a film about climate change because that was something that interested me then, and sometimes somebody asks you to do it. You know, it's just as simple as that. You know, I was asked to make the film about climate change, and I said yes.
What was the thing you said when I saw you just before lunch? You said something interesting about this film. What was it?
I said, because obviously I didn't know the backstory, and when I first watched it, it felt as if it was written as a play and then turned into a film, and it was almost as if you'd seen a really good production of it and thought, I really like the way they projected the image onto the wall, and he was looking at it as if to say, I'm not going to make it look as if he's looking over the city, I'm quite clearly saying he's looking at this picture of the city, and I felt as if it felt like it was a piece of theatre filmed as a film, and that's why some of the angles are obviously out of focus and in focus stuff, but like when you had one shot of him in a TV, it felt like if you were just watching it as a piece of theatre, you'd be seeing it from here, there'd probably be a TV on stage, wouldn't you? Up. So it added this dimension where you really felt the film was the best medium to have told this story in.
Oh, brilliant.
That wasn't really a question.
You've been answering it yourself.
But was that intentional?
Very much so. I mean, it was one of the early decisions I made through the process is to make the theatricality a big part of the film, and that sort of that came out of like the realization that, I mean, when we look at drama documentaries in theatre, the idea of authenticity is usually accepted despite all the artificial strategies that's being used. I mean, an example I always use is a theatre piece called Black Watch, that was hailed for like portraying the Iraq War as it really was, an authentic piece of theatre, and I mean that was really interesting to me, despite the fact that at one point, I mean, there's two characters that jump out of a pool table, like sort of emerge out of a pool table as if it's a coffin, but nevertheless that very artificial symbolic image was seen as very authentic. But if you were to displace that within a film, the artificiality becomes something that is criticised. And I wanted to explore like how why that is. Why is it film that our association with film as something that portrays realism, and especially documentary. Why is it that realism is the mode we use to tell real stories? Can't it be something more than that? So that's why the acting style, the placing the scenes within a theatre space became a big aesthetic choice.
I always think it's always interesting the way that that's sort of the end, trying to sum up your story that you tell. So it's quite interesting to decide how you decided to end it in that way. Especially with the end scene with Feltham and the fact that you show the boy now.
Yeah, on the road.
On the road.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I suppose that kind of summed it up, really. He'd seen him a little bit earlier leaving the prison. And then, I mean, it's often a problem with a documentary. If you don't have a script, you kind of think, how does this story finish? You know, it's... And for me, that was the kind of neatest way of doing it, really, to have him being out and then maybe leave the viewer thinking, how long will it be before he's back in again? And we'd heard Lyndon just before that, the lad really poignantly talking about how he worries about people forgetting him, which I thought was good close to the end as well.
For me, I guess I had the advantage of having a sort of a script in forms of the transcripts that I was working off. But the reason that I ended with Malcolm was because he said something that really resonated with me and stayed with me like throughout the making of the film, and especially the editing of the film, is this sense of what he was saying was, please don't judge me, because as you saw, the things that happened in Sarajevo, the betting on the lives of civilians running across the street, and things that is on the surface of it all is, if somebody tells it to you, it was, that's a horrible thing to do, and how can he do that? But if you really start engaging with how he feels about it, how it's still present in his mind today, and what has led him to become so detached from his situation, I mean, you can start understanding why a person would do that, and why it's important not to judge him. And that also resonated with me in terms of the criticism that I'm giving, was the cameramen's reactions behind the cameras were saying, come on boys, another one, like sort of praying for another bomb to fall. And you've got your daylight shot, that shot where the bomb hits the building, sort of really exciting, proclaiming that. I mean, it's easy, as my reaction was when I first saw it, it's like, that's really, really bad. But if you think about the situation that they were in, maybe it's not, we shouldn't be as quick to judge as well. And that's kind of dimensions that I also wanted to raise, and ending it with that statement as it opens as well, because he says it at the beginning as well, please don't judge me. I thought was quite important to sort of leave the audience with. Yeah.
You said the governors weren't particularly helpful
in
the whole process, they weren't happy with you being there. Was there at all a sense that it was actually quite an enjoyable experience for the inmates? So I don't know, because obviously you're giving them an opportunity to actually, that might be one of their dreams to be in a music video. Obviously it's very different style, but that's something that they would find enjoyment in. They get to rap, and especially if they think they're good. Was there a sense that that's actually too rewarding for the inmates, that they're there to be punished rather than having an enjoyable?
I don't think it was because of that. I think their objections were that we were going to that we were untrustworthy, and that we would present Feltham in a very bleak light, and we'd just be adding to this unfortunate image that people have. And actually, the governor, I don't want to criticise them too much. The governor and his deputy were actually trying to do something about Feltham. They're trying to make it better, and I think they were just very frightened that we'd come in and we'd be very negative about it. No matter how much we told them, and no matter how much we explained to them, they just wouldn't believe us. But your other point about whether they might enjoy it, I think, prisons are boring. It's boring don't go to prison. It's really boring, and that's the main thing. It's dull. So any diversion, like a film crew coming along and saying, "Hey, let's make a film, everybody," that's quite good fun for people.
And did it help you with making the next one, with making song words, that you'd made this one and people could see it and see what sort of approach you were taking? I'm sure
definitely.
that reassured them, if nothing else.
With Rainers, I know, like Carla said, was there anything with Feltham that they couldn't do or see? With the soldiers, was there ethical issues about what they were talking about. Like I found it because it was really like he said, don't judge me. It was really damning some of the things that could have been portrayed, and he said he's doing it to get the truth out there. Was there nothing ethical about that, with people saying no, you're not allowed to say that? Or
I think it's very important to be as clear as possible to the people you're dealing with from the very start what you're intending to do with a film, and as long as you do that and they are aware of it, that you are talking to them in order to make a film about their experiences. It's up to them to let you know what they want you to know. And obviously, if one of them came up to me and said, "Please, if I feel really uncomfortable with you portraying this particular story I told you," and I would respect that. And I think it's important to do that. Legally, I could do whatever I wanted with the interview because they've consented and signed a piece of paper. But I mean, I don't see the point of not considering your subject matters. And
that's why you went for the reenactment of the interviews, didn't you?
Well, that was the first reason why I reenacted the interviews.
Were there more questions? I know Becky had a hand up. Becky,
One really quick. I was just wondering how long you were in the prison for. So from the moment that you met the people there to finishing filming, how long that was?
Quite a long time, about 4 or 5 months. But most of that was research. Most of that was just hanging out, talking to people, chatting to people, getting to know them, just making sure people feel comfortable.
And had you established a team of people before you went in? How much had you prepared before you began that?
Well, interestingly, I had a researcher and an assistant producer, both of whom were young women. And a couple of people said to me, well, I wouldn't send women in there, especially young women, and kind of they're going to get a lot of stuff from the boys and, sexual innuendo and blah, blah, blah. And actually, I thought it would work really well because I knew they were both women who could handle themselves and kind of not put up with any nonsense from the boys. And I just thought they're not that if I'd sent a couple of young male researchers in, I think they would have, the boys might have felt a bit challenged by them and felt the need to be cocky and kind of, so it worked really well with the two women. I mean, they had a few little episodes, as you'd imagine.
This brings me to the question that I thought that I would ask on behalf of the students. What advice would you give on, people here, if anyone here wanted to go into documentary making, in particular taking a more unconventional, a fresher approach to documentary that wasn't just, the old observation. What advice would you give them on how to go out there, do it, and how to get their films shown as well? In particular, do you have any kind of reflections on, the festival circuit or things like that? Is there any advice you could give people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the world is changing, and the world of documentary is changing in this country. Traditionally, it's been funded by broadcasters, particularly by BBC and Channel 4. And that still happens, of course, but the nature of what they're funding, particularly with Channel 4, is changing enormously. So now, what they regard as really great documentary is My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, and that's fine. If you like that kind of stuff, that's absolutely fine. I don't really regard it as documentary. So I think all that is changing, and obviously TV is changing. In 10 years' time, TV schedules won't exist, I don't think. And I, personally, I've just had a terrible battle with Channel 4 over a film I was making, and they wanted to change it so much that it almost became unrecognisable. And I think what lots of people now are doing who want to make interesting, challenging work is, looking for other sources of funding, looking outside broadcasters, looking at different foundations, looking at crowdfunding. And that's, that's a struggle. But if you have a passion and you really want to do this, then that's worth thinking about. And I still think that, the BBC is still putting money into documentaries, into proper documentaries. I'm not saying Channel 4 aren't doing it at all. Of course they are, but there's less and less. And actually there's less opportunity to do really challenging work, really difficult work, or stuff that's not really kind of straightforward.